This week in wrestling history, in 1984, Black Saturday, it is what kicked off the series of events that would lead to the WWE versus WCW war and Vince McMahon's consolidation of the wrestling business. In 1984, much like a dystopian novel by the same name, it was in this year that we saw what many thought is the closest thing we've ever come to the literal Twilight Zone in real life, when then WWF owner Vince McMahon Jr. appeared on WCW TV to introduce WWF matches to an audience that had never seen them before. It would, and at the time, many thought this was ludicrous because wrestling was still in the territory days. Each territory or region had its own promotion, own promoter. Promotions would not run in each other's territories, and each promotion would be more or less relegated to their own regional TV. Now, Vince McMahon was someone who sought to buck that trend. After he had bought the company, the WWF, from his ailing father with the promise that Vince Jr. would not interfere with the other promotions, Vince soon began a power grab over the entire wrestling business, going directly against his father's wishes. This meant he was running in regions outside of his territory, signing talent to exclusive contracts, and also ignoring the governing body of wrestling, the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, which at that point still served somewhat of an important role. Also, finally, he eliminated his competition as he started to buy them up. And the last one is the most important one to pay attention to, because that's what plays into this story of Black Saturday. In 1984, Vince made a play to buy Georgia Championship Wrestling. Now, not for the reason that you might think, though, because at the time, Georgia Championship Wrestling was partnered with Ted Turner and World Championship Wrestling to show stars like Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair on a national audience on the TBS Superstation, which was owned by Turner. Hopefully you're following along with me here. Vince at that point wanted to get WWF a time slot on the TBS Superstation, because that would mean his talent, his show would be on a station that was shown to a national audience. So Vince, being Vince, tried to do that. Turner relented and said he would not agree to that. So Vince did what he can only do, and that's play the game. In order to get that coveted national TV time slot, Vince bought a majority stake in Georgia Championship Wrestling from the people like Jack Briscoe and Jerry Briscoe, which meant not only did he purchase Georgia Championship Wrestling, but he also took control of that coveted TV, national TV time slot that was allotted to them. So he used this to promote WWF. When fans tuned in expecting to see Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, they instead got the likes of Mean Gene Okerlund and George the Animal Steele. And in the end, Vince got to promote his superstars on a national time slot and dealt a huge blow to a major territorial rival, and Turner was left fuming and used this motivation to really kickstart WCW as a national competitor. And the days of the territories were from then on numbered. Trevor, looking back at this huge power grab that happened 37 years ago this week, what do you make of this? Looking back, what does Black Saturday really signify in the pro wrestling industry?
Like you mentioned, this was pretty much the first play to the whole Monday Night Wars that will follow many years later. Um, this was so I wasn't too up to date with this. Didn't know exactly all of this before. Heard bits and pieces of it. Read more about it. Um, it was one of those things. Reading about it, you feel like this was just early Vince, showing how much he how power hungry he was, how much to being the best and being at the top he was willing to, what he was willing to do to do that. Um, it was a shame. It was smart. It was conniving, but it was also smart Like went about it as a smart businessman, but like, again, it was a conniving plan because he had other intentions from the get go. It's crazy. Just reading about this was it, like you said, it's kind of like a novel. It's kind of like something you watch on TV. Like this really was like a Hollywood thing that really happened. You know what I mean?
It changed wrestling forever, and that's what I'm trying to like get across by being so dramatic about it, because it was you were watching live drama unfold on your TV
Oh,
if you tuned
yeah.
in to Georgia Championship Wrestling. Like this was a huge deal. Some of these people had never even seen or even heard of Vince McMahon or the WWF. Like they
No,
probably knew
no.
about it, but they hadn't seen it, and then they were exposed to it. And this really is what made WWF, WWE, whatever you want to call it, the big national juggernaut that it became in wrestling. And again, I want to also emphasize the point that Ted Turner, like this was what pissed off Ted Turner to the point where he felt like, I'm going all in on this wrestling thing. Without this, I don't think you see the ferocity or the resources put into World Championship Wrestling that they were, because
I mean,
Ted Turner
Vince
felt
did something
one-upped.
Exactly. Vince did something that has never happened to Ted Turner, like you just said. He one upped him. Like Ted has never had that in the business game.
Absolutely, and he ended up one-upping him later when WCW folded and he bought it. But
Yeah.
that's the story for another day. But just to signify what this means, there's so many storylines. We talked about Ted Turner and this being, the provocation that he needed to really put the resources behind Nitro and WCW. We talked about Vince McMahon. This was the biggest power grab in wrestling history, because shortly after, bought out AWA, bought out the rest of the territories, bought out the libraries, bought out the competitors, and he became the number one thing, the number one entity of wrestling nationally. And it's all due to this time slot that he, in whatever ways, big thanks to Jack and Jerry Briscoe, acquired.
Yep.
It's just so mind-boggling to think that the ambition to do this in 1984 is just, there's nobody else who could have done this. It's unrivaled is what I'm trying to say. Like, there's nobody else who would have done this, because even Vince's father literally on his deathbed, as he sold the company to his son or gave it to his son, he said, "Son, don't buy out, don't promote against the rest of the territories." And Vince defied that and did it anyway. It's just so crazy to look back at, so crazy to think about.
Yeah, man. This changed pro wrestling in a whole, man. It ushered in an era that we never thought would have happened.
Yeah, and after this, we saw the rise of Hulkamania, the rise of WrestleMania, the golden era, really, of wrestling, of WWF, rather. And, the other thing that I have to think about, like, we touched on it, like, was this the right move, do you think, for pro wrestling? Like, what would happen if the territories were still around today? Like, it begs the question.
That's a very interesting question, and a very interesting thing to think about. Like, Georgia Championship Wrestling, I mean, like on certain TVs, you could get it on the like dial, the UHF channel. I think you flip it over on the old TVs, and I remember my brother talking about watching it or whatever. But like, it's one of those things. Like, I never saw it because, I mean, I wasn't born at the time. But yeah, man, like you wonder what would have happened if all of these other promotions were accessible on TV. It's just a lot. I'm sorry.
we just had a Zoom moment there. It was, but it was, it's just crazy to think about if the territories were still around, and in the national, really global scene of wrestling now, and how much that could have changed, and the stars like Steve Austin, The Rock, like, do they happen in the territory days? We don't know, but it's just,
you had Georgia Championship Wrestling, you had Texas Southern, you had
WCCW, you had
the Mississippi promotion, right?
You had Mid South. Was that Mid South or whatever Jerry Lawler's promotion was?
Yeah.
And then you had what's it called? Up north, AWA. Like there were so many different promotions. Then you had Canadian Stampede up in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
It's just It's just so much. And like Vince basically at one point owned it all. And now slowly they're chipping away at that. Ring of Honor had a great show this past week. We saw AEW is doing amazing things, selling out 10,000 people arenas. Like, so it's moving. It's moving back to hopefully a more saturated product, and that's what we want to see from. Thanks for watching this video from Real Take Sports Talk. Remember to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever a new video is released. Also remember to check out our live show every single Thursday at 8 p.m. right here on the YouTube channel. And remember, keep it real.